Welcome to Responding to Cybersecurity Incidents, a portion of the full Cybersecurity First Responder course from Logical Operations. My name is Stacy McBride, and I will be your instructor for this course. This will be our third and final session in our Responding to Cybersecurity Incidents course, and in this session we will be considering how to prepare for a forensic investigation as a CSIRT. So now that you've got access to your courseware, let's continue with session 3 of our Responding to Cybersecurity Incidents course. In this session, we're going to be looking at preparing for a forensic investigation as a CSIRT. Now, we have to understand that as a first responder, there's a lot of different tasks that you may need to perform during an incident. And part of that will be to be able to ensure that your forensic responders will also be able to do their jobs. Now, in fact, often there may be some bleed over between the assignments of our incident responders and our forensic analysts, and some of the initial forensic tasks may be performed by the incident responders. As we look at the different duties, you'll see that the basic steps that are going to be followed by a forensic analyst include the 4 items that are shown here: collecting information and evidence, examining that, analyzing it, and then reporting. Now, there is an article that is published by NIST. It is the NIST Special Publication 800-86. And this particular publication is very useful because it provides a very useful guide for integrating forensic analysis into our incident response. And I'll just switch over to that article here quickly. This is what the article looks like, and if you're interested in looking it up, this is the URL. So it's csrc.nist.gov, publications, NIST Pubs 800-86, SP 800-86.pdf. And that file is a really good overview of the forensic process, the things that may need to be done, and how to integrate and coordinate that with your incident response. One of the key things that we're going to have to, of course, be aware of is how to hand off the information from the initial incident responders to the forensic analysts. And that, of course, has to be done in such a way that no information is lost. And, of course, we have to make sure that the actions of the incident responders don't hamper the efforts of the forensic analysts as well. So as we look at this, the more that you as an incident responder understand about the role of the forensic analyst, the better you'll be able to coordinate your efforts with them so that we don't end up creating a problem where evidence is damaged in some way because of actions that the incident responder may have taken. Now, the forensic analyst could also go by other names. Sometimes they're called forensic computer examiners or digital forensic examiners, or perhaps a computer forensic detective. But in any case, the particular functions of that person or group of people are going to be the same. They're going to use and make use of technology to be able to investigate and attempt to recover information from computer systems, from memory, from storage devices, DVDs, USB sticks, and hard drives, and also analyze volatile information from RAM that would contain lists of things like processes that are currently running, open network connections, open files, and so on. And so all of that information is going to be collected. They're going to also try to put together a timeline based on the timestamps of access to each of those assets, and in this way be able to build a narrative that explains and describes just exactly what was done with that computer. And through this, they may be able to point to a possible culprit and also may be able to determine whether that individual committed the action accidentally or whether there's a pattern that demonstrates that they knew what they were doing and that they proceeded and progressed through the attack in an orderly fashion. So these are some of the things that we might end up looking at. Now, of course, when we're acting as a forensic analyst, we'd be trying to collect evidence of cyber crimes or computer crime, and this could involve anything from hacking, terrorism, corporate espionage, theft, fraud, or pornography. Any of these types of things certainly may be investigated. So if the computer is involved in a case, often forensics will come into play. But we do have to understand that performing a forensic analysis on a system is time-consuming and therefore expensive, especially if you have to farm it out to an external organization or company. And so we do need to have clearly defined policies that describe exactly what thresholds need to be exceeded before we would invoke this forensic analysis, which of course will protect us perhaps from further harm, but we have to make sure that the cost of the investigation doesn't cause more harm to the organization than the cost of just simply returning the system back to a functioning state and letting it go. Now, the forensic analyst will act as part of the CSIRT team, and they will be involved in investigating and trying to reconstruct crimes that may have occurred or violations of policy. And so they're going to be looking for evidence, and they'll use the 4 phases that we have highlighted here: collect that evidence, examine it, analyze it, and then, of course, report on it. And if you want more detail on that, you can check out that document, the NIST SP 800-86, but of course, the full Cybersecurity First Responder course from Logical Operations goes a little bit deeper into that in our next module and looks at some of the functions that a forensic analyst may perform. Now, of course, one of the things that will need to be done is to look at the evidence and, first of all, determine was there any type of crime or violation performed. And as they do this, they're going to be collecting that evidence in such a way they're protecting it so that it may still be admissible or usable within a court of law. The analyst may also try to determine if any sensitive information has been exfiltrated from the organization, and they would, of course, provide their feedback on their analysis. They would also support others and help to train them in their use of tools and following the correct processes to ensure a successful collection of that information. And they also may be involved in the ongoing audit functions as well. So the better you understand the duties of a forensic analyst, then, of course, the better you'll be able to coordinate your actions with the forensic analyst to ensure that your actions will aid and not hamper their goals as well. Now, one of the things we have to understand, of course, is that the primary purpose of an incident responder is going to be to return the organization's operations back to a normal state. And that would be normally the primary goal for incident response. However, the goal of the forensic personnel would be to gather evidence so that they can determine what perhaps the root cause was of the incident and even trace it back to its source, and then, of course, possibly use that evidence in some type of legal action. And so if you understand this, you understand that it is possible that we could have 2 conflicting goals here, because returning a system back to a functioning state quickly may make it very difficult for the forensic team to be able to collect the evidence that they need. And so we have to have within our organization a clearly defined policy that describes exactly how the 2 different teams or the individuals tasked with those functions, how they will cooperate and coordinate their activities to ensure that both goals can be met within a reasonable period of time. Now, in order to facilitate some of this, we have to ensure that, first of all, we have a single point of contact between the teams, ideally. So we want to have a liaison that has been identified that will be involved in communicating. In this way, we won't have any confusion. We'll have a single authoritative voice that will allow us to share information between the teams. We need to make sure that when we're handing off an incident to the forensic team for investigation, that we clearly identify to them what the overall scope of the incident was. And this is going to be very important so that they don't waste their time looking at areas that are perhaps irrelevant and can then focus on the important assets that were involved. We have to detail, of course, all the assets that were involved, and if there was malware involved, was it quarantined or was it potentially deleted by anti-malware software? That will be important in their investigation. And many times, if there is malware on a system, it may be claimed by the user of the system that the actions that were taken were not their actions, but the actions of the malware. And so, of course, the forensic analysts want to really closely look at that if a system is infected or has been infected, to try to rule that out and to determine exactly what triggered the various actions that took place on that system. We also want to describe to the forensic team any steps that we took to contain the incident and what recovery procedures have already been performed on the devices, if perhaps they've already been returned to a functioning state. Now, the problem here, of course, is let's say that we've got a web server that's been compromised. If we simply re-image that web server, patch it, and return it to service, we've lost all the evidence that may be on that server. So this is why many times members of our incident response team will have some training in forensics, digital forensics, so that they can do some of the preliminary work and then perhaps hand off the later evaluation and analysis to someone that has greater skills. But some of the initial things that could be done is they could be tasked with capturing the volatile information from the system and perhaps capturing a forensic image of any storage media so that we can analyze that forensic image. And a forensic image is basically going to be a bit by bit or sector by sector copy of the partition on a hard disk. And this copy can be proven to be exactly identical to the original drive through the use of hashing, cryptographic hashing, where we would calculate a hash value for the original drive, we would calculate a hash value for the forensic copy, and so long as those hash values are identical, we can prove that the copy is in fact an exact replica of the original drive. So if our incident responders, our first responders, can perform some of those functions, then of course this will then allow the forensic analysts to take that back to the lab and spend the many hours of time that it will take to actually evaluate and analyze that evidence. We want to make sure the forensic team knows which tools were used in response to the incident, because again, when a tool is utilized on a system, it may leave footprints. It may modify things like the MAC times on files. MAC times are the modified, accessed, and created timestamps that are associated with files on systems, and each operating system manages those differently, and different tools may affect those timestamps differently. They also could make other changes to the system. And of course, the forensic team needs to be able to explain any changes that have occurred to the system in order to be able to show that even though changes may have been made to the evidence through the use of those changes in no way could have affected the findings of the forensic team and their conclusion. And of course, timing of each event in the incident is going to be critical. And of course, one of the things that the initial responders are going to have to do as part of gathering their volatile information is they're going to have to check the time clocks on all of these systems involved and record any time skew from an accurate time source so that any file date and time stamps or log entries that have a timestamp on them can then be adjusted so that they will be unified to a common time source. And this will make it easier to, again, trace the sequence of events, put together a timeline, and build a convincing narrative as to what actually happened on that system. And we will have more information on that in our next upcoming lesson, or our next upcoming course, I should say. which again is taken from the Cybersecurity First Responder course. Now, these guidelines that you see before you cover off some of the main points that we've considered. Of course, these guidelines are available as well from within your LO Choice website. And just to remind you of what that looks like, I'll drop into the LO Choice website. And you can see that from the LO Choice website, if I go home, that I have two tabs here, or two tiles, I should say, and responding to cybersecurity incidents is the course we're working on right now, and we're talking about guidelines for conducting post-incident tasks. So if you expand that, you'll see that these points are going to be the same points that we're going to go through on our other slide, and you can actually use this as a checklist, as a reminder to see what some of the important steps are going to be when we're dealing with post-incident tasks following an incident and during our handoff of that information through to our forensic responders. And so as we look at these, we would, of course, number one, want to draft an after-action report or lessons learned report that will detail the various lessons that we have learned. What did we learn from this incident? Is there some changes that we need to make in order to improve our defensive posture? Were our processes effective? Were our tools effective? What do we need to do to protect ourselves better? We're going to review existing policies about how our handoff of information to the forensic team went. We're going to look at that and determine whether the policies may need some adjustment or not. Did we follow the policies or did we deviate from them? And then, of course, set up meetings to share that information, define who our point of contact will be for the communication, and of course, if there are individuals that we feel the forensic investigator should interview, then we would want to make sure that those investigators are alerted as to who those individuals are so that they can plan for those interviews. And then, of course, discuss what we might need from other teams, because remember, we may not be able to do everything ourselves. IT might be involved in this, but we may also need input from HR, from legal. We may need input from, of course, the forensic investigators as well. And then determine, are we going to need to modify our policies? And, of course, work along with that forensic team to determine which data that they've collected is relevant to a potential investigation. So that brings us through to our summary of the Develetech incident that we've been discussing so far. You'll remember in session 1 and 2, we looked at what had happened with the incident, and we learned that, of course, there was a problem where an attacker had tried to log in through Charles' computer, had been unable, but they were able to find Linda's password, which he'd written down. They logged on and stole a schematic of a smartwatch. And so now, as you look at this slide, this continues our summary of what's been done at this point. So we're still responding to the incident, and we would then, of course, disconnect the affected host from the network, perhaps run a malware scan on the systems to determine is there malware there or not, and there was none. We would leave those systems offline for now, perhaps. We would take a backup of our R&D server, drop it onto a new machine or a new hard drive, and return that to function, put it back into production so that, of course, we can satisfy the incident response need. And then, of course, we would look at perhaps re-enabling Charles' account because his wasn't compromised. We'll leave Linda's account disabled at the moment and perhaps provide her with a new temporary workstation that she'll be able to use when she gets back from vacation. And we're going to mandate some additional training for her. And so in the after-action report, we would make some recommendations. Things like that data that was stolen should have been encrypted in the first place. We want to have company-wide training for our end users. We want to make sure that we create policies, if we don't already have them, regarding proper secure password usage. And if we implement data loss prevention on the server, that may prevent these types of occurrences in the future. So these are some of the things that come out of our incident. So now that brings us through to activity 10-4 on preparing for a forensic incident. Now, in this scenario, it says you've concluded that a breach has occurred and you've done what you can to stop it and return operations to normal. Suspecting that Develetech will want to weigh the possibility of pursuing legal action, you and your CSIRT will prepare to hand off your results to a forensic investigation team. Sharing this information with this team accurately and efficiently will greatly assist their efforts. And so what I want you to do now is perhaps pause the recording, review the 4 questions, consider the answers, try to look back in the courseware and come up with good answers for those questions. And then once you've done that, resume the recording. Okay, so let's see how we did with this. Our first question was, how do the goals of a forensic investigator differ from that of a first responder? And of course, we know that a first responder is normally concerned with detecting the incident, stopping it, and then returning our systems back to an operating state, a normal state. Whereas, of course, the forensic responder is primarily concerned with collecting evidence in such a way that that evidence can perhaps be used in a legal action. And so because of this, we may have conflicting goals, and so those goals have to be handled. We have to work out some type of compromise, and again, that needs to be then documented in our incident response policies so that all of the players understand how that coordination will work between the different roles. Question 2 asks, despite the differences in goals, how do the 2 disciplines overlap? Well, of course, both of these disciplines are going to be involved in securing and isolating assets, sharing information with each other, reconstructing a timeline of events, and to some degree, trying to get the systems back into a functioning state. So there will be a lot of information sharing that would be helpful on both sides as we move along. Question 3 asks, after understanding the function and responsibilities of a forensic team, you and your CSIRT are ready to begin the collaboration process. What are some of the best practices that you can employ when communicating your results to Develetech's forensic team? Well, first of all, we do want that single point of contact. So designate a liaison for communication. We need to make sure that the overall scope of the incident has been properly communicated. We've identified all of the assets that are involved and any individuals involved, be they employees or external parties as well. We also need to make sure that any techniques and tools and actions that have been taken are going to be clearly communicated so that, again, their effect can be taken into account during the forensic analysis, and they can rule out that it was not the attacker that performed those steps, but it was, in fact, the incident response team. And then our 4th question, Develetech's CSIRT and forensic team have met and discussed the incident at length. What specifically do you need to give the forensic team so that they have all the information they need to do their work? Well, you might want to send them all of the relevant event logs and network device logs, because, of course, those might correlate some of the other things that have already been identified. Linda's workstation will need to be seized and handed over to forensics so that they can do their examination. And the R&D server will also need to be examined for any evidence that might be pertinent to the case. We will, of course, also provide a list of all the different steps or activities that we performed as an incident response team, and, of course, provide the after-action report, including all the details of what our incident responders knew about the incident, so that, again, the forensic team is provided with as much information as possible to make their work more efficient and effective. So that brings us through to the end of this session, or this particular topic. And so we are asked a couple of reflective questions here related to the course, and we want to think about these ourselves. Have we seen security incidents within our own organization, and how was it handled? Do you think it was handled well, or do you think there is room for improvement? And was digital forensics involved in the incident response process? Of course, there are many case studies available as well. And in fact, we looked at a couple of case studies, or referenced them at least, in session number 2. And those case studies are recorded in the courseware. So if you wanted to go back and look at those as an example, you could do so. So it's always good to look at these examples because they help us to determine how we would respond in similar circumstances and refine our responses. So if you want to learn more about the Cybersecurity First Responder course, which of course includes what we've considered, plus a lot more information related to incident response, forensics, detecting incidents, analyzing that, indicators of compromise, and so much more, then of course you're going to want to get in touch with Logical Operations. The website is www.cfrcertified.com, or you could send an email or phone the number on your screen. And through that site, you can get more detailed information about the actual course and also the certification, the CFR certification, and the exam associated with that certification. So by all means, if you are in any way acting as a member of a blue team, a first responder, incident response, or forensics, you may want to consider pursuing the CFR certification and training, because it really does give some very good hands-on, very practical training related to dealing with incidents that may occur in your organization. Well, I do hope you've enjoyed this course together and our final session, and I look forward to seeing you back here for another course. So have a great day and hope to see you again. Take care.